Bonjour à tout le monde and welcome back to my channel. My name is Alex and today I would like to talk about how I learned French. Now, French is of course one of the most studied languages around the world. It is also one of the most spoken languages, and it's, I think, the language that is spoken in the second highest number of countries after English, mainly due to it being the official language of a lot of African countries. And it was also the main language used in international diplomacy, certainly until World War I among European countries, and I think maybe even until World War II, after which it was replaced by English. Now, I will discuss about how I initially went about learning French, what my motivation was, what my first approach was, how this approach changed over time, and what lessons I learned. Now, I actually didn't speak any French at all until I was 21. I grew up in northern Italy, speaking Italian, German, and Latin, and I had learned English at school, and by the time I was 21 I had also studied a little bit by myself Dutch and some Russian, but French I had really no idea. I couldn't even say a single sentence. And it was at that point, when I was 21, that I thought to myself that it is actually a bit of a scandal that I didn't speak any French at all, considering how influential French had been in the European history, certainly during the last 500 years. So what I did is, back then I was still studying at university, and I signed up in a language course at my university. Back then that was still for me the default mode of learning a language, to sign up to a language course. But that was actually the last time that I ever joined a language course. After that, I discovered that I far more prefer learning languages in an autodidactic way, and more about that later. So I basically joined this language course, and it was a very standard course. We would learn some words initially, some greetings, we would learn some verb conjugations, and the course was like 1 or maybe 2 hours a week. But I did study quite a lot outside of the class. I would study perhaps even 1 hour a day by myself. I would sit down and learn all the conjugation tables, because I'm a little bit of a grammar nerd. I'm not saying that you have to focus on grammar. That's just something that I like. But it's also, the approach was also influenced a lot by the fact that I already knew Italian and Latin. So for me, a lot of aspects of French were very intuitive. They were not weird at all. The way you conjugate certain verbs, the way you use certain words and so on, they were quite intuitive to me, and that's a big advantage if you're learning a language from the same family of a language that you already know. So after 8 months, at the end of the academic year, I had reached a certain level where I could communicate a little bit in French, and I'm a person who always likes to start speaking rather soon. So after class, if I had a question for the teacher, I would always ask that question in French, while everybody else would ask it in English. And I also noticed sometimes that the teacher was a little bit surprised about the fact that I approached her in French, which is a little bit weird. Like, we're there to learn French, but then there is this idea that we only learn French during the class hour, and then after class we would all speak English again. Why? This is one of the aspects of language courses that I don't like so much. Another aspect of language courses that I generally don't like so much is the fact that, we learn a language by absorbing it, not so much by thinking about it. And this is something that I realized more later on. that when we hear the language a lot, we hear it again and again, the patterns in the language become normal to us. We absorb them, and then that's how we know how to speak. But when you're in a classroom, you are surrounded mainly by people who don't know the language. And then when you do some exercises in class, you would constantly hear these people speaking incorrectly, making a wrong use of certain words. And I don't think that is something that would affect you in a very positive way. I think that would actually hinder your progress in the language. Now, one of the positive sides of attending language courses is, of course, that you get a guidance of where you should go, and that you also have a certain accountability, the fact that there is a course every week and that you should attend it. This is very useful, of course, if you don't have a very strong self-motivation to learn the language, and in terms of the guidance, if you don't know generally where to go with your language learning. But if you have been learning languages for a while, you will find more and more your own way of how to learn. So coming back to the language course, at the end of the course, I had reached this level where I could speak a little bit, and I felt that now it was time to really build up the vocabulary, to really immerse myself into the language. And so what I did was I just started watching content on internet in French. And at the time I had a very strong anime phase, and I used to watch a lot of anime. And then I just tried to find the French dubbed version of some anime, which you can often Google and then find. And so I actually watched, I wanted to watch the whole Dragon Ball series again, the first one, because I grew up watching Dragon Ball, and that is something that has influenced me a lot. And so I started watching that in French. And my experience initially was quite surprising, because after 1 year of French course, I had this feeling that I understood quite a lot and I could say quite a lot. But after watching 10 and even 20 episodes, I felt that I understood almost nothing. I really struggled so much. I only understood 10, maybe 20%. And later I realized that this is not necessarily because I didn't know the words. What it was is mainly because I wasn't used to hearing French. What I discovered there is that when we listen to a language, it is so important that we're able to anticipate what's going to come next. Because a language is not made up of single words, it's a pattern that keeps repeating itself. If you are a native English speaker, or you speak English at a very advanced level, then now watching this video, you're probably never surprised by any word that I suddenly use. Every word that you hear coming out of me is probably something quite quote-unquote normal. But if you haven't listened much to a language that you're learning, you're not used to the patterns yet, and so you don't know what is a normal word that would come now and what is not a normal word that would come now. You're not used to it, so you're constantly surprised by every word that is coming. And that is something that is necessary to get used to. It's not very pleasant, of course, because you will spend a lot of time listening to noise in a certain way, not understanding what is being said. But trust me, it is possible to get used to it. Now, this is of course easier if you speak a language that is in the same family. Like in my case, I already spoke Italian and also Latin. But it is possible with other languages as well. I have been learning, Japanese, I've been learning Russian, I've been learning Chinese, and with those languages it is definitely more difficult, but it is possible by listening again and again to get used to the patterns and to get used to the language. So this is what happened to me watching Dragon Ball. After I had watched 153 episodes, at the end of those, I went from understanding 10 to 20% of what was being said to understanding easily 90%. After that, I found that this was the way that I should keep on going. I should just watch content. I should watch content that I find interesting. And the key is that the content should be interesting, because when it's interesting, you stop caring about whether you understand or not, and you start focusing on the plot. And that's what happened to me. I was at some point so focused on the plot that I stopped thinking about that this is actually in French. After that, I didn't really have any other anime that I wanted to watch, so I started watching YouTube videos, and I found two very interesting YouTubers, Normand Tavo and Cyprien Yoff, who were very popular in France 10, 12 years ago. They were the number one YouTubers. They made really interesting videos. Every video that they dropped got like 10, 20 million views. And I was really looking forward to every video which they posted. And so I really got into this French culture a little bit by knowing about these YouTubers, by following them, by understanding what kind of jokes they were making. They were also joking about cultural things in France. And so at that point, I had really reached this level where I almost started making French my own, the French language and the French culture my own. And this is another big step in the language learning process, when you at some point stop feeling that the language that you're learning is foreign, and you start making it a bit your own, which means that you start feeling at home in the language. That is a really big hurdle. So the first one I would say is when you start listening to a lot of content and you overcome that fear of listening and just get used to the patterns. And the second big hurdle is when you start feeling at home in the language. So I kept on listening and following these YouTubers for lots of years, and at that point my French had reached a pretty high level, and I then went on to learning Japanese and some other languages. But interestingly, through this whole time, I actually rarely spoke French, and I'm usually a person who really likes speaking languages. I really like practicing them. But throughout all this time, I didn't know any French people, and at that time I hadn't discovered online tutors yet. So I actually rarely spoke French. And when I had to speak it, another really interesting thing happened, that I heard myself say sentences that I didn't know I knew. I heard myself use certain words that I had never used before, but they just came out of me because I had been listening and hearing these expressions and these words so many times that they just naturally came out of me. And that was such an interesting experience. And it really showed me that you really can learn how to speak by mainly listening. Now, it is also good to actually speak, because then you practice what it's actually like to speak the language. But it is probably not so important to speak a lot in order to internalize the patterns of the language. So in summary, I started learning French when I was 21. At first, I attended a French class for about eight months, where I learned the basics in French, but not so much more in order to be able to understand conversations. And that is mainly because the class was taught in English, and in these classrooms, there was almost more English being spoken than French being spoken. And the real breakthrough came afterwards, when I started watching content online in French. I watched 153 episodes of an anime in French, and then I kept on watching YouTubers in French for several years, and I reached a really high fluent level without ever living in France or living among French speakers. And this really showed me that even after you have turned 20, you can reach a pretty high level in a language. And it showed me how powerful input is, how much you can really learn and how far you can really get in a language by really consuming a lot of input. I really hope you liked this video. I hope you found it interesting and useful, and I'll see you next time. Take care.